She stood in the cold night air, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other clutching a worn-out bag. No family, no home. Just the sound of cars rushing by as strangers avoided her gaze. She didn't ask for pity, only a chance to survive. But when a millionaire stopped in front of her, what happened next wasn't charity. It was something no one could have predicted. Was it fate, or the start of a story that would shatter everything we think we know? It hadn't always been like this for Alicia. Just a year ago, she had a small apartment, a steady job at the local diner, and dreams of raising her first child in a safe, loving home. But life in her town had a way of shifting quickly, especially for someone who didn't have the privilege of blending in. Being a young black woman meant working twice as hard for half the breaks, and when the diner closed without warning, her safety net vanished overnight. At first, she thought she could manage picking up odd jobs, stretching every dollar, telling herself it was temporary. But the whispers from her landlord grew sharper, the looks in the grocery store colder. And when her pregnancy began to show, judgment seemed to follow her everywhere, as if her very existence was a problem people wanted to ignore. The night it happened, Alicia had nowhere else to turn. Her belongings fit into one weathered bag. She walked through the dimly lit streets, each step heavy with exhaustion, the winter air cutting through her thin coat. Street lamps hummed above, casting long shadows that made the empty sidewalks feel even more isolating. She wasn't looking for a miracle, just a place to rest her head for the night. But fate had other plans. Because just a few blocks ahead, someone was about to cross her path. Someone with the power to change her story forever. Alicia had walked past the same corner store dozens of times before, but tonight it felt different. Her coat barely shielded her from the biting wind, and the weight of her bag dug into her shoulder. She kept her head low, avoiding the stares she could already feel pressing against her. The glow from the store's neon sign reflected off the icy pavement, casting a harsh light that seemed to expose every detail of her tired face. As she neared the entrance, two men standing outside stopped their conversation and watched her. Their eyes traveled from her swollen belly to the worn-out sneakers on her feet. One muttered something under his breath, just loud enough for her to hear. Another one, looking for a handout. His friend chuckled, shaking his head. Alicia kept walking. She'd learned long ago that confronting these comments didn't change anything. It only gave people a reason to make it worse. But tonight, it stung differently. It wasn't just about her anymore. Every insult, every sideways glance seemed to sink deeper because she knew her child would be born into this same world. A few blocks later, she stopped in front of the old bus station. It wasn't much, just a crumbling building with a flickering light above the door, but it was warm inside. And sometimes, if she was lucky, she could blend in and rest for a while before security asked her to leave. But before she could take a step inside, a sharp voice called out from behind her. "Hey, you can't be here." She turned to see a middle-aged security guard walking toward her. His uniform looked a size too small, and the heavy flashlight in his hand swung like a warning. "I'm just waiting for the bus," she said quietly, though she knew no buses ran this late. He narrowed his eyes. "Don't lie to me. I know your type. Always trying to hang around, make trouble." Her stomach tightened. She had nowhere else to go, and now even this small hope was slipping away. "I'm not causing any trouble," she replied, her voice steady but low. But he didn't care. "People have been complaining. You scare them. You need to leave now." Scare them. She glanced down at herself, at the faded coat, the frayed cuffs, the obvious curve of her pregnancy. She wasn't a threat, just someone with nowhere to hide. But she'd heard those words before, and she knew they were never about what she had done. The humiliation burned. She turned away before he could see the tears in her eyes. With every step, the cold seemed sharper, the darkness heavier. By the time she reached the next intersection, her legs ached and her fingers were numb. She paused, trying to catch her breath, when headlights slowed beside her. The sleek black car didn't belong in this part of town. It gleamed even under the dirty streetlights. The kind of car she'd only ever seen in magazines. The window rolled down. A man's voice, calm but curious, called out, "Are you all right?" Alicia hesitated. She'd learned not to trust strangers, especially men in expensive cars who suddenly took an interest in her. But something about his tone was different. It wasn't pity, and it wasn't the condescending kindness she'd encountered so many times before. Still, she stayed on the sidewalk. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. The man studied her for a moment before speaking again. "You're pregnant. It's freezing. You shouldn't be out here alone at this hour." Her chest tightened. He wasn't wrong, but she also knew that letting someone in could be dangerous. "I don't have much of a choice," she finally admitted. There was a pause. Then the passenger door swung open. "Get in. I'll take you somewhere safe." Alicia's heartbeat quickened. Every instinct told her to walk away, but the thought of another hour in the cold was unbearable. She took a small step forward, then stopped. What if this was a trap? What if the somewhere safe was anything but? The man seemed to sense her hesitation. "Look, I can drive away if you want. But something tells me you've had enough people turn their backs on you." His words cut through the noise in her head. He wasn't wrong. With one deep breath, she slid into the passenger seat, gripping her bag tightly. The car was warm, the leather seat soft against her frozen hands. For the first few blocks, they drove in silence. She stared out the window, the blur of streetlights flashing across her face. But curiosity gnawed at her. Who was this man, and why had he stopped for her? Finally, he spoke. "My name's Daniel. Well, I guess people will call me a businessman." She caught a glimpse of his tailored coat, the watch on his wrist that probably cost more than her rent for a year. He was clearly from a world far removed from hers. But as he continued talking, she noticed something else. He didn't ask for her story, didn't press her with questions. Instead, he told her about the community center he supported, the shelter he had helped fund on the other side of town. When they finally pulled up to a small, well-lit building, Alicia felt a flicker of hope. The sign above the door read Haven House. But as Daniel got out and came around to open her door, a shadow moved in the corner of her vision. Across the street, 3 men stood under a street lamp, watching. One of them pointed toward her, saying something to the others. She felt her chest tighten again. Trouble had a way of finding her, and this time, she wasn't sure if Daniel's presence would make it better or worse. The 3 men across the street didn't just watch, they started walking toward her. Their voices grew louder, carried by the cold wind. She couldn't make out every word, but the tone was enough. Mocking, threatening. Daniel noticed immediately. "Stay here," he said, his voice low but firm. He stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the icy pavement. But the men didn't slow down. One, tall and broad-shouldered, smirked as he looked at Alicia. "Well, look what we got here," he said. "Guess the shelter's letting anyone in these days." Alicia's pulse quickened. She'd heard variations of that sentence too many times before, always meant to reduce her to nothing more than the color of her skin and her circumstance. Daniel raised a hand. "That's enough. You need to leave." The second man laughed. "Or what, rich boy? You think having money means you can tell us what to do?" Alicia gripped the strap of her bag tighter, her heart pounding. This wasn't just verbal anymore. There was something in their body language, the way they closed in, that made her feel trapped. She thought about running into the building, but every instinct told her that would make her look weak. And in moments like this, weakness could be dangerous. Then it happened. The tall man stepped in closer, close enough that she could smell the alcohol on his breath. "You think you're better than us? Walking around like you're owed something." He glanced at her belly and sneered. "Bet you don't even know who the daddy is." The words hit like a slap. Not just the insult, but the venom behind it, a reminder of how people like him saw her. A judgment rooted not in truth, but in the color of her skin and the shape of her life. Daniel moved fast. He stepped between them, his voice sharp. "That's enough. Back away." But instead of retreating, the tall man shoved him. Daniel stumbled but stayed on his feet. The third man pulled out a phone, recording, muttering something about catching this on video. And suddenly, the balance shifted. Alicia knew how these things could spiral. She'd seen videos online, how quickly the narrative could turn against people who looked like her. All it took was a single edited clip, stripped of context, and the world would see what they wanted to see. A car slowed as it passed, the driver's eyes lingering on the scene before speeding away. No one was stopping. No one was helping. Inside, the lights of the shelter glowed warm and inviting, but they felt a mile away. Daniel straightened his coat, his eyes locked on the men. "You're making a mistake," he said. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. The tall man laughed. "The only mistake here is you thinking you can protect her." For a second, time seemed to freeze. Alicia's breath formed small clouds in the air. She could hear the faint hum of the street lamp above, the distant sound of a siren somewhere far away. Then, one of the men lunged not at Daniel, but toward her. Before she could react, Daniel stepped in front of her, taking the impact squared to his chest. He didn't fall, but the force drove him back a step. His eyes never left theirs. "You'll leave her alone," he said, low and unwavering. Something in his voice must have broken through, because the men hesitated. A tense beat passed before they stepped back, muttering curses as they disappeared into the shadows. Alicia stood frozen, her legs trembling. She had been seconds away from becoming another statistic, another story whispered about but never truly understood. Daniel turned to her, his expression softening. "You're safe now," he said. But deep down, she knew safety was never guaranteed. Not for someone like her. Not in a world that could turn on you in a heartbeat. And as they walked toward the shelter's doors, Alicia realized this moment wasn't the end of her fight. It was only the beginning. Inside the shelter, the warmth felt almost unreal after the biting cold outside. The faint scent of coffee and the low hum of conversation filled the air, a stark contrast to the tension still buzzing in Alicia's chest. She sat down on one of the worn couches, her hands wrapped around a paper cup Daniel had pressed into them. The steam curled upward, blurring her vision for a moment, though she knew it wasn't just the heat making her eyes sting. Daniel spoke quietly with the shelter staff, explaining nothing of the confrontation outside, only that she needed a safe place to stay. Within minutes, a kind-faced woman approached and led Alicia to a small, clean room. A bed, a blanket, a knitstand with a single lamp modest, but to her, it looked like sanctuary. As Daniel prepared to leave, he stood in the doorway for a long moment, as if deciding whether to speak. Finally, he said, "You don't owe me anything, Alicia, but you do owe yourself a future. Don't let what happened tonight make you believe you deserve less." His words sank deep. She wanted to thank him, to tell him how much it meant that someone had seen her, truly seen her, without judgment. But her voice failed. All she could do was nod, her hand resting protectively on her belly. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of those men, felt the sharp edge of their words, the weight of their stares. But layered over that memory was another image Daniel standing between her and danger, refusing to move, refusing to let them win. By morning, something inside her had shifted. The fear was still there, yes, but so was a quiet strength. She had survived one more night, and she knew that in this world, survival itself was a form of defiance. But Alicia also knew her story wasn't unique. The harassment she faced wasn't random. It was part of a system that made women like her invisible, until they were convenient to blame. How many others were walking through the cold right now, being followed, being judged, being told they scared people simply for existing? How many more stories like hers were unfolding in silence? The truth is, racial injustice isn't always loud. It isn't always caught on camera. Sometimes it's in the quiet dismissals, the suspicious glances, the doors that close before you can step inside. And sometimes, like that night, it's in the open, raw, and undeniable. Daniel's intervention didn't fix everything. It couldn't. But it reminded her, and maybe even him, that change doesn't happen in sweeping gestures alone. It happens in moments when someone chooses to step forward instead of looking away. As Alicia left the shelter days later, her path was still uncertain. She didn't suddenly have a home, a job, or security. But she had something she hadn't felt in a long time, proof that her life mattered enough for someone to protect it. And that small spark could be the start of something bigger. Her story is one of countless others, each a thread in a much larger fabric, one woven with pain, resilience, and the stubborn hope that someday these moments won't be necessary. But until that day comes, we have to ask ourselves, when we see injustice in front of us, will we be the ones who turn away? Or will we be the ones who stand in the cold and say, "Not this time"?